Hello, everybody. I bet you're excited as I am to be here. Shonda, thank you.
Thank you.
So I grew up with my father, who was an artist, and the creative process to me is endlessly fascinating. So I thought maybe we could look into the creativity and not that you will reveal any secret sauces, but sort of the toolbox that you use in giving us this kind, these kind of moments. So I wanted to start with, at what age did you start telling stories, making up characters? Was that even before you could write?
Yeah, I think I was always a storyteller. I mean, people always ask that question, when did you know you were a writer? I don't think that there was a time when I ever thought of myself as anything but. I really was making up stories into a tape recorder and trying to get my mom to type them up before I could write myself. That's sort of how we spent our time as kids, my sisters and I.
Right. And at what point did the idea of becoming a screenwriter enter into your head?
In a weird way, that was kind of out of necessity. I thought I was going to be a novelist. I really had these big plans to be Toni Morrison. And Toni already had that job, so you can't really get that job. I got out of college, and I didn't know what to do with my life. And my parents are professors and very much wanted me to go to grad school. And they did not want me to be a writer because writers did not make a living. They didn't want me to starve. And so I read an article that said it was harder to get into USC Film School than it was to get into Harvard Law School. And that sounded to me like my parents couldn't say there was a problem with that because it was harder than Harvard Law School.
Right.
And I told them I could teach if I went to film school and I could go into the writing program, and that sounded great to me. And I applied and I got in, and so I went. And it wasn't until really I was there that I really seriously thought, oh, wait, I really like this. I was mostly just trying to find a way to stop working, honestly, and go back to school.
Now, your first screenplay was for film, though, right? You didn't start in television right away. Is that correct?
No, I thought I was going to write film. Back then, I got out of film school in 90-something, and at that point in time, film really was what was happening. Yeah. Television wasn't as big at the time. Sitcoms were big. It was sort of the Seinfeld era. But dramas weren't as big at the time. And so movies really did feel like where it was at, independent film was really big. And I thought I would write movies at the time. So I started out doing that.
And you did, right? You did?
Yeah, I sold spec scripts and things, but my first produced project was Introducing Dorothy Dandridge, which starred Halle Berry for HBO.
Fantastic. All right, so from that, how did Grey's Anatomy come about?
After that I sort of started writing, I like to call them teen girl movies. I wrote Crossroads, and I wrote Princess Diaries 2, and I enjoyed it, and it was the living, and it was great, but there wasn't a lot of character development going on in those movies. Things were more blockbustery kind of films. But then I had a baby. I adopted a baby, and I was at home a lot. And what you realize when you're home that much is there's a lot of television to be watched. And I started really watching television. And I watched, I think it was 24, the television show 24. I watched an entire season of 24 in 24 hours. And I loved it. I thought, wow, this is where all the character development's happening. This is really interesting. I watched, I think, 3 seasons of Buffy in 4 days. And babies never sleep, and so you're always awake and you're watching. And it was genius to me because that's where you could really develop characters. And I remember calling my agent and saying, I want to do TV. And he sent me over to ABC Studios, which then was called Touchstone. And I had a meeting, and they said, you want to write TV? That sounds great. And let's try it out. And we tried it out.
And Grey's Anatomy was the result.
Yeah, I mean, the first year I did a pilot, I wrote a pilot about war correspondence, which I wrote the script and I was really proud of it, and it was a really great experience, and it didn't get made because it was about war correspondence, and they were having a lot of fun, drinking and being very competitive and having a lot of sex while covering war, and we were at war, so that did not feel very appropriate. And the next year I remember asking very clearly, what does Bob Iger want to see? And they said, Bob Iger wants a medical show. And I love to watch surgeries. I used to love to watch all those surgeries on the Surgery Channel. I'd been a candy striper. I thought it was very interesting. And so I wrote a medical show about people who were very competitive and had a lot of sex and really enjoyed being competitive and doing these things while doing surgery. And that was Grey's Anatomy.
And what did you learn after that first season? What were the lessons?
What did I learn after that first season?
Yeah,
oh my gosh. It's a really interesting job because you go from being a movie writer where you're at home in your pajamas by yourself and you would type one script a year. Literally, I would spend 300 days doing nothing, 40 days thinking, and 15 days writing, and one day celebrating the fact that I'd written something. To suddenly you have to churn out a script every 8 to 9 days, and you have 300 people working for you, and you have to run a writer's room, and you have to know what you're doing. So it was 0 to 3,000 in an instant. And if you're a very introverted person, if you've never held any other job before but possibly being an assistant, it was pretty intense. So I learned a lot. I learned pretty much everything you could possibly learn as fast as possible.
Sort of baptism by fire?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's stick with Grey's just for a second. Last TV season, 2015-2016, Grey's in its 12th season, if the data I saw is correct, was the third highest rated network drama in the 18 to 49 demographic. So the question is, how do you approach the show each season in order to keep it fresh and interesting for the viewers?
Oh, wow. I always try to think of the fact that Meredith Grey has been on a journey for now 13 seasons. It's not the same show every year, and I'm not doing, even though there is a procedural element, every week there are medical stories and every week there are medical cases and you're watching her solve them and you're watching our doctors do things. It is a character journey. I feel like I've been writing a novel for 13 years. And Ellen Pompeo, who plays Meredith Grey, and I have been locked together in this very interesting journey for a very long time. And because she is sort of fearless in, show me without my makeup, go ahead and cut back to me 12 years ago, watch this journey happen, watch me age on screen, all of these wonderful things, we get to really watch somebody evolve on camera. And every season, what I try to do is look at each season as if it's a completely different show. Not as if we're going to tell the same story we told last season, or we're going to try to repeat the feeling we got the last season, but where is Meredith now? And how do we make that story feel interesting, and how are we going to tell it?
Right. You told me in a previous interview that at the beginning of the season, you know what the last episode will be?
Yes.
And you work towards that? Is that how you approach planning out the season?
That's how I approach Grey's, yes. On Grey's, I know how it's going to end, and we sort of start with that last episode in mind and go and try to get there, basically.
So after Grey's came private practice. What is it about the medical profession that fascinates you? And you've written so many medical procedures. Would you feel able to perform any now?
If anybody here wants to give birth, I could perform a C-section. I'm very sure of it. If you need an appendectomy, I know that I could do that from beginning to end. Don't fall and hit your head, because I will do like all kinds of procedures to your brain. I think I know how to do them, like backwards, forwards, and sideways. I'm probably very dangerous because I know just enough to be scary, but not enough to actually save anybody's life. But what's great is that you get excited about this stuff. What I love is that profession is filled with life and death experiences. On a bad day, you actually kill someone. That is the point of the job, and on a good day, you save someone's life. When you have a creative thought in that job, you are inventing a new medical procedure that's going to change the way someone lives or dies or breathes or moves. In our job, when I have a creative thought, it just changes the story. So there's something really visceral about that job that I love. I also loved, especially in the beginning, the cutthroat nature of it for women. There really were about 6 women out of 20 for every medical class, which is what they say in the pilot. That was interesting to me, to be in a place where you were, so overwhelmed by the men in the program and thought to be less than. That's no longer true. There are a lot more women who are surgeons now. But at the time, that felt like a fascinating world to enter. Private practice came along, though, because the president of the network at the time, Steve McPherson, said, I want a spinoff. And I am nothing if not obliging. I'm a very straight-A student. And I thought, well, okay, let's make a spinoff. And really started thinking about it, and I really loved the character of Addison, who had come on to be just a guest star and ended up staying. And there was something about that character and who she was and what she could be that felt interesting to me, and I thought, how can we make that a show? And what was great about Private Practice was it was very different than Grey's. Grey's was about these surgeons and how they felt about their patients. Private Practice was about the moral and ethical dilemmas of medicine, which was very different.
Right, absolutely. So then we were blessed with Scandal. How did that's a whole different kind of show?
Completely different world, yeah.
And how did that one come about?
Scandal came about, I had 2 shows going at the time. I was exhausted. And Betsy Beers kept saying, there's this woman that I really think you should meet. Her name is Judy Smith. She is a Washington fixer. And I kept saying, that's great, but I'm not writing any more shows. I don't have time to meet anybody. And she said, well, just meet her. We have to meet her because I set up this meeting. And I said, okay, we'll give her 15 minutes. And so Judy Smith came in, and Judy Smith had done everything from representing Monica Lewinsky to getting Clarence Thomas through his hearings. I mean, she'd done a ton of things. And she came in, she sat down, we started to talk, and I think it was like 4 hours later, I looked up and thought, like, I'm hungry. Like, that's the only reason why I looked up. And I realized that there was a show in there. There were hundreds of episodes in what this woman did for a living. It was fascinating. And I was stuck. Like, I was stuck because now there was all these stories in my head, and that was a show. It took about a year for me to write that show. I kept thinking, I'll put it over there. And then I went away for, I think, maybe 4 or 5 days, and I wrote the script and came back and turned it in and said, like, okay, this will be a show. But it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. How often have you and your writers come up with events that then actually played out in real life? And what do you do in those situations?
I think a lot of times we write things that end up being disturbingly real. It started with Thorngate. We came up with this concept of Thorngate. Your phones can listen to what you're saying or doing. Anybody can tap into your phone and pay attention to you. Your computers can be switched on to watch you. And we made all this stuff up, and we thought it was really funny, and we thought it was really awesome. And then 3 months later, we found out it was real. There was all these articles about it. We thought that was interesting. Then it just kept happening in these ways. We'd make things up and think we were being really cute and smart and fun, and then it would keep going. And somebody in the room was like, I think we're like witches or something. And I said, we're not witches, like, it's just weird. By the time we got to Hollis Doyle,
Yes.
our outspoken, crazy Republican guy running for president who said really appalling things, I don't know. I really don't know what's happened.
Let's leave it at that.
Yes.
Let's leave it at that. Okay. Now, the Scandal cast seems particularly close-knit and tight. What are the advantages as the showrunner of having that kind of atmosphere on your set?
You know, it's a really good thing to foster, to have a group of people be that close to one another. They're a really close-knit group of friends, and part of what I've learned is that it makes sense to just try to, create an environment in which everybody wants to be together, in a non-competitive world in which everybody really feels like they are a family. And what makes it wonderful is this is a group of people who would show up and rehearse on their lunch breaks because they wanted to rehearse because they thought it would be fun. They spend time together outside of work. We get together on Sunday nights to watch the show so that everybody's ready to live tweet together. There's just a sense of family there. They're very bonded. A lot of things happen because a lot of creative things happen, a lot of fun things happen just because everybody is so close and hangs out together in their free time, in their, extra time. That's just how it goes.
Right. Whose idea was it to start the live tweeting?
We started live tweeting. We got everybody on Twitter. Carrie came to me and said, you're on Twitter, I'm on Twitter. We both know what Twitter's like. We should get everybody on. So we got everybody on Twitter. I was already live tweeting things. And so we got everybody live tweeting. Carrie and I got everybody live tweeting almost immediately. And what was great is it wasn't just the cast. The cast was live tweeting, the crew was live tweeting, the directors were live tweeting, and then, other writers were live tweeting, my researcher was live tweeting, and then fans were live tweeting, and then journalists were live tweeting along with us. And after a while, it felt like you had this lovely community online of people who were all doing it together. And I remember our ratings were okay the first season, and then somewhere in the middle of second season, Oprah started live tweeting along with us, and that sort of changed everything.
That's right. Okay, so for the benefit of the people in the audience who are not from the United States, the showrunner is a very American figure.
Yes.
It doesn't really exist to the extent that it does in the US in other countries. Can you give a brief definition of the span of responsibilities that go with it?
Yeah, in American television, a showrunner is, and it's kind of an odd word because it doesn't truly, I don't think, accurately cover it. The job is very different for everybody. But a showrunner is sort of the head writer on a show who both runs the writer's room and runs the production of the show. You can't just be the person who runs the writer's room, and you can't be just the person who runs the production of the show. You have to do both. You are in charge of what's happening on the set in a lot of ways, and you're in charge of what's happening in the room. You're in charge of the creative vision of the show overall. That goes to budget, and it goes to keeping the actors happy and healthy and taken care of, and it goes to keeping the stories happening and the trains running on time, as I like to say, which means scripts coming in on time and things happening when they're supposed to.
Right. Now, at Shondaland, your company, there are shows that are produced for which you are not the showrunner.
Correct.
So what is your relationship on those shows, which are How to Get Away with Murder, The Catch, and the new one that we'll talk about in a minute?
Yes. So on How to Get Away with Murder and The Catch, my job, especially when we're not in the first season of a show, I always say it's different. In the first season, it's different. But when we're not in the first season of a show, and I haven't created the show and I'm not running the show, my job is really just dragon in a cage, I like to say. So I'm the dragon that Pete can release out of a cage for How to Get Away with Murder when he feels like he needs some extra power behind him to talk to the studio or the network about something. I'm the dragon he can release from the cage when he has some creative issues that he needs help with. And we joke about that because I used to call, in the first season of Grey's, I used to call Mark Gordon, who was our non-writing executive producer on Grey's Anatomy, I used to call him my dragon because he was the most powerful person on our show. And I would say, I'm going to go release Mark Gordon from his cage when we needed him. And so I would say to Pete, I'm your dragon, so I'm Pete's dragon. And so same thing for Alan Heinberg at this point on The Catch. I try to do that for him as well. Creatively, I'm there if he needs me, but generally, these are people who really know what they're doing. So they'll pitch me their seasons, we'll talk about them. I'm always making sure I'm on board, but there hasn't been a time when I haven't been on board yet. So we're doing really well in that sense.
Now, for a script that you write, you come up with a storyline, you create the character. How do you then work with an actor, and choose any example you want? Because you write the words, but the actor brings that person to life. But that must be a collaborative process, isn't it? How together do you bring a character to life that we then see on screen?
I do really think it's a collaborative process. I think it's very important to look at it that way. I don't think a character is a character until an actor is inhabiting that role. And it's always been that way in my mind. You can sort of think of a character as being one way, but until an actor has been cast, that character is not fully had life breathed into it. For instance, Dr. Bailey, played by Shonda Wilson. Dr. Bailey was first imagined as being sort of a short, adorable, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, sweet-faced woman. She was the only person in the script for whom there was a physical description written, wow. Literally. And Shonda Wilson came in and read the part, and Dr. Bailey became a short, adorable black woman, in a completely different way, who had a very different attitude, who wasn't sweet and wasn't warm and cuddly in that sense. She was just a very different, sort of more no-nonsense, hard-working woman. And what was great about that was her interpretation of the character just made the character different. And that became who Dr. Bailey was for me, completely, without question, which was wonderful. What happens a lot is my contract with all of the actors is you will say all the words as they are written. We're not going to discuss the text of the words. The words are text. That's just the way they are. However, while I'm not going to change the words, I'm also not going to go down to the stage and tell you how to say them or how to interpret them in any way, shape, or form. And what I love about that is that you then get these performances back that then inform whatever is going to happen next. So Cyrus Bean on Scandal, for instance, there was something about his explanation about why he would never be president and his rage about that, and there was the way he was playing it that said to me, he has these things that, he's a Republican, he's smart, he's strong, he's this, he's that. And I said, he has a husband that he's been protecting in this whole different way. And I ran up to the writer's room and I said, Cyrus Bean is gay, and he has this husband, and we need to introduce him so that we can play out the fact that he has somebody that he loves. And it just worked really beautifully to have his anger and his secrets and his destructive, powerful nature play out against the backdrop of a marriage with a wonderful man who was just waiting for him to be better than he could ever be.
Right.
And then to have that man, I don't know, spoiler alert, die. But it was really great to watch, how that performance was shaped by that, and then to continue to watch as the show plays out, the performances change the writing, and the writing changed the performances.
Fantastic. I know that Peter Nowak is the showrunner for How to Get Away with Murder, but if we can spend a moment on Viola Davis, who is a force of nature.
Yes.
How is that relationship? Is that different from the one you have with your actors?
And I do think that each one of us works differently. Pete works very differently. Pete and Viola have an amazing relationship, which I love, and Viola's extraordinary. I mean, truly extraordinary. I honestly think that you could take pages from the phone book and give them to her, and she could stand up on the stage and you guys would be weeping. Like, that's how good she is. But Pete's relationship with Viola is, there's a writer in her soul. There's a producer part of her, but there's a part of her that is a writer. So Viola will come and she'll pitch scenes. When we talked to her for the very first time about playing the part of Annalise Keating, she's the one who said, I want to play a scene where I take off my wig and I take off my makeup and you see who I truly am. That was her pitch. That was her story pitch. And it is the best scene that happens in that show. It's amazing. She also often pitches storylines for herself. She pitched Cicely Tyson being her mother, not the actress, but the idea of seeing her mother and who she was and where she came from. She pitches really interesting, lovely stuff, and she and Pete are very collaborative in that way. They discuss storylines, they debate about them, they have these great talks. And for Pete, it's really valuable. He loves it, and it works for him. It would make my hair stand on end, just because of the way my brain takes in story. However, Carrie and I have lots of long discussions about things that are going to happen way in the future, because she has such a great head for politics as well. And those things all often end up feeding into the story too, but it's just different. We have different styles.
Tell us about the new show that is coming up mid-season, correct?
Yes. So we have a new show, which is created by Heather Mitchell, who is another longtime Shondaland writer. She wrote on Grey's Anatomy, she wrote on Scandal, and now she's got this new show. It currently does not have a title. We're calling it the Untitled Shondaland Project at the moment. All of our shows were called Untitled something first. And it's sort of a sequel to Romeo and Juliet. It's sort of what happens after Romeo and Juliet die. We jokingly call it Romeo and Juliet are dead right now. But it's really the story of what happens to the families, the Montagues and the Capulets who've been left behind, and how they're going to cope, and what happens to the town of Verona, and the struggles that go on with who's going to take the throne and how it's going to work, and all of the politics that come with that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. You mentioned that you had people who started for you as writers and who are now showrunners. Has that been important to you, to have people in your company, see them grow and allow them to grow?
It's really been probably the best and most exciting thing about getting to have this company is to watch and let's bring in, find talent and watch them grow and bring them up through the ranks. Not just from, we have assistants who have been here. Stacey McKee, who was an assistant on the pilot of Grey's Anatomy, is now the head writer on Grey's Anatomy. It's wonderful to have people that you've had been here and bring them up and give them these opportunities. But it's also just, at this point, how we work it. The writers who learn how to tell story the way Shonda tells story, which is really through character and about sort of, I always say story is best told by saying what's the worst possible thing that could happen in this moment to the character, and then make that happen, and then get them out of it. That sort of storytelling you learn really well while working in Shondaland. And so it comes from, we hire our assistants and we know that they have potential to be writers. And from there on up, that's how we promote our writers. That's how we train them. And so they come through there. And then we find people who, if they're interesting and they're great and they've been working at our company in other capacities, and we think, wow, we should give them more responsibility if it's post-production, if it's production, if it's anything. We really want to keep people and we want them to stay. So we have people who've been with us for 13 years or more just because we like our people to stay.
And as you have evolved from writer to showrunner to the head of a company that employs several hundred people, I imagine, what has your learning curve been? What new skills have you had to acquire?
I think I've learned a lot. I mean, I really going from being somebody who all I had to do was think about writing and the story to thinking about managing and leading a lot of people. It's going from thinking about just yourself to thinking about a couple thousand people. I mean, 5 shows is a couple thousand, I don't know, some thousand people or so, plus the people who work at the company, plus all the fans who are watching, plus all the people who work at the studio and the network who sort of are the satellite people who are working with you on your shows and are your partners. You become responsible to them, to your partners, and then for all the people who work for you. And part of that is trying really hard, and this has been something that I'm just really starting to feel like I'm getting a handle on, trying really hard to make sure that people feel valued when they come to work. Not feel like they are working, but feel like they are coming to work and feeling valued there so that they're enjoying themselves at work. I always say that work should be fun, and if work isn't fun, then maybe we're doing it wrong. Because it is a creative endeavor and it should be for everybody who's doing it. Right. And so that's really the goal at this point.
Is, of all the things you have to do, is writing still what you consider your most important thing or your favorite?
It is now. I mean, I think there was a period in this journey of learning how to manage all of the things that I do, which is a lot of things, where I sort of felt like, oh, there are so many things I have to do, it's just a piece of it. And I wasn't as happy. I was doing publicity and I was doing business and I was doing all of these things. And I realized that is not, frankly, what ABC Studios is paying me for. And that is not what I came to do this job for. And that is not what I love. What I love is storytelling. And so my job really as a manager and a leader was to find ways to make it possible to have other people do the other things as much as possible to make room for myself to be more of a storyteller most of the time.
So to delegate.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing. If you're a control freak, it's very difficult to learn how to delegate. And so I spent some time really working on learning how to delegate so that those other jobs could be entrusted to people who obviously know what they're doing so that I could spend time doing the thing that I know how to do.
Now, when you write, does your job require that you be able to write anywhere, or do you have favorite places?
I can write anywhere, and I've trained myself that way simply because when you have small children and when you travel and when there's so many shows at so many different lots and locations, you really have to figure out a way to write anywhere. So basically my Pavlovian reflex is, as long as I have headphones on my head and music in my ears, I can write wherever I am. It doesn't matter. I don't have to be in a specific place. The headphones are sort of the thing that transport me.
I've spoken to showrunners and writers who actually dread sitting down and the writing process, but they're happy when they have the finished script. Do you enjoy writing? I mean, does it take you to a zone? Tell us a little bit about what you experience.
I do enjoy writing. I think there was a time when I didn't, where I dreaded the getting there, you know, the forcing myself to access the place where the writing could happen. But I really enjoy the writing process now. I think that because it's been such a habit and because I have to do so much of it, and because there's not a lot of time to think about how much I don't want to do it, there's just not. There's too many scripts to be written. I really enjoy it. I enjoy getting to go sit in the world of the hospital. I enjoy getting to be Meredith Grey for a while. I enjoy getting to be Fitz or getting to be Liv or getting to be, you know, any of those characters. It's fun. My assistants will tell you, bless their hearts, I'm glad none of them have recorded this, I say all the dialogue aloud while I'm writing. Very passionately, and I act it all out, and it's embarrassing. I don't hear it because I'm wearing headphones and there's music playing, but I do. And apparently, Betsy makes fun of me. Betsy Beers, who's my producing partner, makes a lot of fun of me because she's in the office across the way. But it's very important to me to make sure that it feels all right and everything acts out well. And I think that it's a little bit of play acting. It's a lot of fun for me. When I was a kid, I used to hang out in the pantry of my kitchen and play with the cans in there, and it's a little bit of still hanging out in the pantry, playing with cans and pretending that they're doing things. I enjoy it a great deal.
Do you tap into the characters when you have to sit down and write and put in the headsets, or could you be driving or doing something and you'll hear Meredith say something or Olivia Pope say something?
No, I don't think that does not happen for me. Like, I'm not a person who I'm doing something else and suddenly the characters are speaking to me. I've heard of that, but that's not me. That's not feels very magical. It doesn't happen.
You have all the scripts to write. You have all the work you do. And there's little time to do everything, and yet you found time to write a book that quickly became a bestseller. And by the way, it's great. I'm not just saying that. How did this come about? Why was it important for you to write this and find even more time into your day to write?
The book was really, I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. My agent will tell you that I said, "Oh, I want to write a book," and I feel like he very kindly didn't say, "You do not have time to write a book." He said, "Sure," and made a book deal. And it was supposed to be about motherhood. And then I realized I didn't want to write a book about motherhood. So like a year went by and I hadn't written my book and time was running out. And I had been doing this sort of weird year of yes thing, where I had been trying to make my life less workaholic-like, which is really what it started at. I'd become a workaholic, and that was all that I was doing, and I wasn't enjoying writing as much, and I had really been trying to find a way around that. And that sort of became what the book was. And in writing about doing it, it made it even better. Like, I was able to examine why I was doing it and why I had been such a workaholic. And in a lot of ways, that helped make the change. And so it was really a matter of the same way I like to write anything, in the same way writing doesn't ever feel like work. That did not feel like work. The writing part never feels like work.
Now, I imagine that you care deeply about all your characters, obviously. Mm-hmm. Are there any with whom you felt particularly attached, or you felt that you worked some issues of your own out through them?
All of them. I mean, it's interesting. I know that everybody wants me to say Christina Yang, because that's what I wrote about in the book. But that was because Sandra was leaving that year, and I feel like I was grieving the loss of Christina Yang at that particular point in time. But the reality of it is it's all the characters. Every last character is somebody that you're working something out through, or you're feeling particularly attached to. You're a storyteller. You're telling stories. All of your characters should matter. If they don't matter to you, then you shouldn't be telling stories about them, I think.
Are there any that you feel we as viewers perhaps misunderstand? Cyrus, Rowan?
Yes, actually. I mean, we have big arguments about this in my writer's room at Scandal. My writers are constantly telling me that Cyrus is a terrible person or that Rowan is a terrible person. And I'm really offended by that because, Cyrus is a patriot. He really does feel like he is doing what is best for his country. He might go about it the wrong way, but in his mind, the ways that he is going about it are completely correct. And Rowan is just a dad trying to take care of his kid. there might be a lot of murder going on, but he is still just a dad trying to take care of his kid the best way he knows how. And to me, like, I truly look at it from that perspective. And I don't understand how you could think that he was a terrible person if you go from his reality and the way his world works.
Now, you write for broadcast networks, which in the United States, broadcast networks have to comply with more standards and practices than cable or an HBO or a Showtime.
Correct.
Have you ever been in a situation where you butted heads with somebody and it was hard for you to follow the vision that you wanted for a particular episode? Silence.
I'm trying to figure out how to answer this without getting in trouble. Yes, but what's interesting is now, because honestly, you know, it's been 13 years of broadcast standards and practices. There's no way to do 13 years of broadcast standards and practices and not butt heads with broadcast standards and practices. There's a lot of broadcast standards and practices. However, what's interesting is that over the years, what has been a rule, that stuff has changed and it's evolved. I think before I started working in television, the standards were really loose, oddly, and then they got tighter again. I think, yeah, there was an NYPD Blue era, as I like to call it, where it was really loose, and then everything got tighter again. And then things have sort of reached a nice place where it really does feel like it's realistic. And so a lot of it is really about how, frankly, America has changed. I mean, really the standards have changed to match the American people. The same way gay marriage is now legal in every state in the nation, you can now show a gay couple kissing on television and it's not a big deal. I remember in season 2 or 3 of Grey's when Callie was dating somebody and a woman she was gonna run her hand up a woman's thigh or something. It was a big deal. Like I had to fight for it. I had to threaten to call GLAAD or something ridiculous like that. And that seems really silly now and almost puritanical. But at the time, it was a huge moment. Now, none of those things are such a big deal. Feminist moments aren't as big of a deal. Olivia Pope has an abortion because Olivia Pope has an abortion, and it's not a broadcast standards and practices moment in that same way.
Right. Well, our time is coming to an end, but I'm going to sneak in a couple of comments because I would like to speak on behalf, I'm sure, of the audience and the viewers at home and say thank you, because you don't only provide us with great entertainment, but I have found in my life that you have provided usable moments, and I'll give you a couple of examples. When my teenage daughter became overly infatuated with a boy, as females of all ages tend to do, and she was starting to think that her self-worth was in the boy's being and not in her own being, I sat her down to one of the many scenes between Christina and Meredith when they said, "You're the son, he's not the son, you're the son." And there's something, is your daughter almost a teenager now, the eldest?
I have a 14-year-old.
Are you beginning to see how she doesn't pay as much attention to you as she used to?
My daughter thinks my shows suck.
Okay, all right. So if I had told her, be your own son, you know, she would have checked out. The fact that it was coming from you, thank you very much, because she started to see the world a little differently. When my son came out a year ago in his 20s, very later compared to other people, he was concerned about how to have certain conversations with prospective partners, and I pointed him to Connor and Oliver and How to Get Away with Murder, and that nailed it. So thank you very much. And in your book, working moms out there, you've got to read it. There's this thing in the United States where parents of young school-age children have to bake things and bring them to school, and the stay-at-home moms, and I don't mean to imply they don't work, okay? It's just that there are certain moms who bake through the ceiling, and some of us can't and don't have the time, and you made me feel less badly about about store-bought cupcakes. When I would come in with store-bought cupcakes, and they'd look at me as if I were the devil incarnate. So thank you for making me feel better about myself, and please, all of you, join me in thanking Shonda. Thank you for the gift of entertainment you give us.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.